The Pittsburgh Penguins and the Minnesota Wild have a blockbuster NHL trade sitting on the table, and it's all contingent on a no-trade clause being waived to make it happen. We'll get into all the details coming up next. Welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams. So if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So as we've been talking about a lot of the NHL trade rumors over the last number of weeks, one name that's come up multiple times is Phil Kessel of the Pittsburgh Penguins. Phil Kessel is a player that's been mentioned in NHL trade rumors on a pretty much annual basis for the past couple of years, but right now there does appear to be a lot of legitimacy to the fact that he is indeed available. Multiple sources that report for The Athletic covering the Penguins as well as the Wild have confirmed through their sources that there is a deal on the table involving Phil Kessel being traded to the Minnesota Wild. Now I'm going to put up some excerpts here, some articles that were published through The Athletic to give you full details. Now keep in mind, these are just excerpts from the article. If you want to read the full article, you would have to be a subscriber to The Athletic, and I would recommend doing that. It's great content, and it's not very expensive. The first excerpt gets going here to say, the Penguins and Minnesota Wild have a trade proposal on the table with Phil Kessel as the centerpiece, numerous sources confirmed to The Athletic. It's a poorly kept secret around the NHL that Kessel, who produced 82 points in 82 games last season, is available. However, Kessel ultimately will have some say in this decision, as he is the owner of a partial no-trade clause that allows him to name only 8 teams he can be traded to. Many in the Penguins organization assume Kessel would be willing to play for the Wild. He is a Wisconsin native and played one NCAA season at the University of Minnesota. However, numerous sources confirm that Kessel is unsure if he wants to play in Minnesota. He did research on Minnesota and the Wild over the past week, the sources said. Kessel is very close friends with Ryan Suter. Both are natives of Madison, Wisconsin, and have played internationally together for Team USA. It is believed Jason Zucker, the speedy Wild forward who scored 76 goals over the past 3 seasons, would be part of the deal. Minnesota made it clear to other franchises that Zucker, 27, is available. The Penguins and Wild also discussed a couple of players with long-term contracts in Jack Johnson and Victor Rask. According to Michael Russo of The Athletic, the Wild are actively shopping Zucker and have talked to Calgary about Sam Bennett and Michael Frolik. They've talked to Arizona about Christian Dvorak and Kristen Pitcher, and they've also talked to Vegas about Jonathan Marchessault. The deal has been on the table for days. It is believed the only holdup at this point is Kessel, who has the right to veto the trade. Another potential team in this mix is the Arizona Coyotes. Kessel would welcome to playing there under coach Rick Tocchet, who he had a strong working relationship with during Tocchet's time as an assistant coach with the Penguins. However, the ownership situation in Arizona is currently holding the Coyotes out of making an offer. Now, in case you're not aware, the ownership change in Arizona that it's referring to, current owner Andrew Barroway apparently has a sale lined up from what we're being told, and he will be remaining on as a minority owner. It's not quite clear who's buying majority of the team, or those full details are not really made public as of yet, but there apparently is a sale going on in Arizona. The details are not finalized and all that, so we don't have full confirmation. So the Arizona Coyotes are in a little bit of limbo when it comes to making trades or doing contracts right now. Hopefully that'll all be sorted out here soon. Obviously they got a lot of things to do this summer when it comes to trades, free agency, and all that stuff. So I guess we'll stay tuned for further details on that, but that will be a topic in a video for another day. For right now, it looks as though the Minnesota Wild and the Pittsburgh Penguins have an offer on the table to trade Phil Kessel and Jack Johnson over to the Minnesota Wild in exchange for forward Jason Zucker and center Victor Rask. Now, of course, the Minnesota Wild had acquired Rask earlier in the year for Nino Niederreiter. I'd say so far that trade hasn't worked out overly well for Minnesota. Rask only had a few points in the games he played for the Wild, whereas Nino Niederreiter was having a great old time playing with Sebastian Aho and Timo Teravainen, and had a really strong finish of the year, got into the playoffs, and had a strong showing in the playoffs for the Canes as well. Looks as though he'll be a great fit there for many years to come. Examining all the parties in this deal, obviously the Minnesota Wild are getting the older of the players. Kessel is 31 years old, where Johnson's 32. Kessel makes $6.8 million, and Johnson's contract pays him $3.25 million for a total of $10 million in total cap hit between those two guys. So they're the older, more veteran players going to the Wild with a slightly larger cap hit than what's coming to the Penguins. It's also worth noting that Phil Kessel has 3 years remaining on his contract, where Jack Johnson signed a 5-year deal last year, so he still has 4 years left. So the Wild will be getting 2 players over the age of 30, both having 3 and 4 years respectively left on their contracts, whereas the Minnesota Wild will be sending 27-year-old Jason Zucker, who signed a 5-year contract at $5.5 million last year, so he's got 4 years left on his deal, over to the Pittsburgh Penguins, along with Victor Rask, who's 26 and has $4 million on his contract for 3 more years, so obviously that's a slightly lower cap hit. So the Penguins' cap hit between Zucker and Rask would be 9.5, and the cap hit going to the Wild would be 10. So obviously the Penguins would save a few dollars there, but of course this is not a finalized trade. There could be a little bit of salary retention on either side to kind of even things out, and there could also be draft picks or other pieces involved here. But these are the main core pieces of this trade. From the Minnesota perspective, I'm not sure I really like this deal. Phil Kessel is still a very productive player, but he is 4 years older than Jason Zucker. Putting up 82 points is certainly impressive for sure. Jack Johnson, on the other hand, in my opinion, I don't really like that contract. He's a 32-year-old defenseman with 4 years left. Who's certainly not quite the same player he was when he was younger. On the Pittsburgh side of it, though, they'd be getting a speedy forward in Jason Zucker, who would likely be a great fit to either play with Crosby or Malkin in that top 6. I think he'd be a great fit there. On the other hand, for Victor Rask, he might play the role of a third-line center perhaps. Obviously, he's been struggling the last little while. This past year was not good for him at all. Due to injuries, he was limited to 41 games played this past year between his time in Carolina and in Minnesota, and he only put up 9 points. So obviously that contract for Victor Rask is not favorable, but at the same time you can say the Jack Johnson contract's not favorable as well. So at the same time you're seeing them swap 2 productive players in Kessel and Zucker, and at the same time you're seeing them swap 2 contracts that are not overly favorable between Rask and Johnson. But overall, the Pittsburgh Penguins would be getting a slightly lower cap hit, as well as some younger, faster players. So I would personally say that the Pittsburgh Penguins would come out of this deal looking pretty good. The Minnesota Wild, on the other hand, would get a little bit more of a productive player in Phil Kessel, at least on a short-term basis. But at the same time, they're both older players who are not as fast. Obviously, speed and skill are very important in the NHL as well right now. So from the Minnesota perspective, I mean, they're getting Phil Kessel, who's a great player. Overall, though, I think I like this deal better from the Pittsburgh side of the equation. Phil Kessel obviously has some say in this trade. He has a partial no trade. Minnesota wasn't on his list of teams that they could automatically trade to without further permission. So obviously he's mulling this over. Many people, like I said, within the Penguins organization and people that know Kessel would assume he likely wouldn't mind playing in Minnesota given the history he has with that state. His good friend Ryan Suter's there. But at the same time, we really don't know what Kessel's thinking. This is not an easy decision for some players. He's had a good time in Pittsburgh, but it has been speculated over the past year that he hasn't been getting along with Coach Mike Sullivan, and that changes were likely coming this summer with Kessel being shipped out of town. We've talked about it on the channel here numerous times, and it looks as though that those rumors are indeed coming true. If this deal does happen to fall through, I would imagine the Penguins are going to continue to shop Kessel and find a deal that works for him, that'll work with his no trade clause, and a deal that works for them to bring them back a pretty decent return here as well. So, of course, we could find out here just about any time if Kessel decided to accept the trade or if he's definitely said no and the deal's not going to happen. So we'll update the situation further once more information becomes available. But in the interim here, for the point of discussion, which is why we do most of these videos anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts and your opinions down in the comment section. What do you think of this trade? Especially give me your points of view from both sides of the equation, both teams' perspective. Would you make this trade if you're Minnesota? Would you make this trade if you're Pittsburgh? And who do you think would come out on top here longer term? If you're new to the channel, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So stay tuned for more information on this potential huge NHL trade, as well as plenty of other content. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you next time.